At 2:23 in the morning, three Ukrainian FP-1 drones moved into waters, watched by Russia flying at 180 kilometers per hour. They were going after a Russian ship that had been blocking Ukraine's sea drone missions. The Russian spy ship was about 15 miles off the coast near Novorossiysk. Its R381T antennas were listening carefully. For 6 weeks, it had been watching and recording patterns of movement and was only a few days away from guessing future attacks. The Sea Patrol had been calm until now. But that peace was about to end in just a few seconds. The Russian crew didn't know a Ukrainian drone was already flying only 3 meters above the water, coming right toward them. Because these drones were made of plywood, they showed up on radar smaller than a seagull and were almost invisible to systems that tracked metal planes. About 20 minutes after launch, a Russian Forpost-R scout drone showed up on the horizon, flying its usual circle about 30 kilometers off the Ukrainian coast. The Forpost had a Canadian-made MX-15D heat camera that could see a basketball from 5 kilometers away. Its heat camera could notice a change as small as 2 degrees Celsius at 2:45, the first FP. One drone's engine heat popped up on the Forpost screen. The Russians saw 3 tiny spots flying low and fast toward the east. They zoomed in to check, but right then the drone's auto-escape started. The drones dropped to just 2 meters above the sea, hiding in what radar users call ground clutter, the noisy signals made by waves that hide low objects. Within minutes, the wooden drones cooled down until they matched the sea's temperature. On the Forpost heat camera, the drones had totally disappeared. The operator logged the contact as possible, birds, and kept patrolling. He did not know he had just let through the first wave of an attack. Behind the drones, the reason for their rushed launch became clear. Russian Shahed missiles had found the launch site and arrived just minutes after the FP-1s left. The operators barely escaped as 50 kilo warheads turned their equipment into scrap metal. The spy ship's smart network was working, but it was not fast enough to stop what came next. At 3:30 hours, while the FP-1s crossed the Black Sea, 20 Ukrainian naval drones launched towards Sevastopol at 80 kilometers per hour. What happened next tricked Russia into leaving its most valuable intelligence ship totally defenseless. The decoy swarm used a mix of changed jet skis and cheap commercial boats with simple guidance. Each cost under $10,000. Throwaway tools made to look like Mirage V5 naval drones on radar. They kept formation, sent the right radio signals, and moved at attack speed so Russian radar operators saw what looked like a big naval drone attack. Making a real-looking decoy swarm needed more than just sending boats. The drones had to move in real attack patterns, spread into assault groups, come together on likely targets, and even do fake evasive moves. Ukrainian crews controlled them by satellite for the first 50 kilometers, then flipped them to autopilot. Each drone broadcast on frequencies known to be watched by Russian intelligence. Some even had heat sources to copy the infrared signature of armed drones. The trick had to be perfect. The Russian admiral had 6 Ka-27PL helicopters nearby. Helicopters at Novorossiysk and Fort Sevastopol were the Black Sea Fleet's main defense against naval drones, because ships are too slow to chase them, and fighter jets can't hover. But helicopters can cover 100 kilometers, in 20 minutes drop RGB, 16 depth charges that destroy everything within 50 meters, and use dipping sonar to hunt underwater drones. Without them, Novorossiysk sea approaches were defenseless. Russian doctrine said, respond to the visible threat first. So all 6 Novorossiysk helicopters launched west at 270 kilometers per hour. The loud womp-womp of their rotors faded as they raced toward the decoys. Every minute they flew west was another minute. The real drones flew east unopposed. By the time they realized the deception, they'd be 360 kilometers out of position. The spy ship, 15 miles off of Novorossiysk, now had no air cover, no quick reaction force, and no way to vector helicopters to investigate contacts. For the next 2 hours, any drone that got past the patrol boats would have a clear shot. The 3 FP-1s adjusted course 15 degrees north. This wasn't random. It used something the Ukrainians had found through months of observation. The Russians had 2 Podlet K-1 radar stations covering this sector. Each radar rotated at exactly 10 revolutions per minute. Picture 2 searchlights spinning for 4 seconds every minute. Both were pointed away from the same dark corner. That corner was a 2-kilometer corridor the drones had to hit precisely, but the Russians adapted. Random desynchronization removed predictable blind spots, and the corridor was shrinking. The first drone entered at 0447. 4 Seconds invisible, 2 seconds visible as one radar swept past, then invisible again. The radar operator saw a brief contact, something small moving fast. The second drone followed 30 seconds behind, still on course, still invisible with full fuel, but the third had developed a problem. A microscopic flaw in its autopilot gyroscope caused it to drift right 200 meters off course and keep growing. At 4:48, Russian operators received orders to randomize rotation patterns. The third drone corrected hard north, burning precious fuel. It entered the collapsing corridor at 4:49. Both radars painted it clearly. Contact bearing 270 speed, 180 altitude, 50 meters. The operator reported 20 confirmed targets at Sevastopol versus one questionable blip. He marked it probable bird and returned to tracking the decoy attack. The third drone had made it through, but that maneuver burned 12 minutes of fuel. It would reach the target area with less than 60 seconds remaining. Meanwhile, the Russian spy ship maintained station 15 miles off Novorossiysk. Despite the decoy attack, its mission took priority. 2 Project 03160 patrol boats maintained a protective screen circling at 5-kilometer radius around it. Standard doctrine since losing the Mosba. The spy ship radar could see threats. The patrol boats couldn't, vectoring them like a quarterback calling plays. At 0500, the decoy fleet performed its final act. As the Russian helicopters closed to engagement range, the 20 drones scattered in different directions. Some beached themselves on empty coastline, others circled in place until their fuel ran out. A few simply stopped moving. None attempted to reach actual targets. Their job was already done. The helicopters spent another hour hunting stragglers, burning fuel and wasting ammo on drones that cost less than 1 depth charge. By the time they headed home, they were 180 kilometers from Novorossiysk and half their fuel was gone. The real attack was still coming, but morning fog kept getting thicker. At 0600 hours, the lead FP-1 was 240 kilometers from the target when its GPS position started sliding east. The drone did not turn. Reality was being rewritten. The Russians had turned on their R330Z HTO system from Crimea. This was not crew jamming, but quiet fake GPS signals broadcasting at 100 watts, while real satellites work at 0.00001 watts. The Russians had perfected the trick and began walking drones toward the ground, now steering the FP-1 toward a Panzer battery. But Ukrainian operators had learned too. Every 50-kilometer oil platforms dot the Black Sea, and the FP-1's simple camera could see them from 5 kilometers away and reset position from preloaded coordinates. No spoofing can beat the old, reliable Mark 1 mod, 1 eyeball. The second drone never made it to the next platform. At 0615, its GPS receiver died not from jamming, but from a cheap Chinese capacitor that failed in changing temperatures. Without GPS, it switched to inertial navigation, but INS over water adds about 10 meters of error per minute. 8 kilometers off course meant it was heading for empty ocean, not the target area. At 0645, it hit the water with no explosion, just gone. 2 drones were left. The third one 5 kilometers behind still had clean GPS, but not for long. The Russian ship went active and its mineral ME radar began scanning the western approaches, while the ship's signals intelligence team worked too, because every electronic device makes extra ghost frequencies, and they use those when circuits resonate. At 7:23, they found one at bearing 285, going 180 kilometers per hour, and 15 kilometers out. The ship's radar locked on, and the lead drone's simple threat receiver showed the lock. But wood confuses radar made from metal. The mineral ME looks for sharp returns from aluminum, while wood gives soft, inconsistent returns, so the radar kept losing lock. The operator called it an intermittent contact, maybe birds. The third FP-1 made a choice because its simple program let it detect radar ahead. It shut down everything except the mechanical gyroscope and flew blind using only its compass. Heading but running this electronic warfare system caused another problem. The ship's R984UM jammers that protect against naval drones made noise across many bands from 20 to 1000 megahertz, which are the same bands used for the ship's radios. Every time the jammers sent signals, they weakened their own radar returns. Russian doctrine calls this electromagnetic fratricide, your own systems interfering with each other. The manual said it was a calculated risk, and now they would learn the cost. At 7:25, the ship sent a patrol boat to check the intermittent contacts. The boat sped up to 35 knots, and the crew manned the forward PKM machine gun. The gunner loaded a fresh 200-round belt, checked the sights, and braced the mount while the loader stood ready with 2 more belts. They had drilled this hundreds of times to engage low-flying targets at 500 meters and walk tracers into the target. Maintain fire until splash. Standard procedure: investigate, identify. Engage if hostile, but they were briefed for aluminum drones with infrared signatures. Nobody mentioned plywood ghosts. The lead drone had 3 minutes of fuel. Behind it, the third drone flew on invisible but blind. The morning fog was now thick enough to cut visibility down to 500 meters. At 0730, the lead FP-1 reached the target area, 15 miles off of Novorossiysk. The Russian spy ship sat exactly where predicted, still vectoring patrol boats toward the incoming threat. The spy ship had created a radar fence, 2 patrol boats with overlapping positive ME. One covers various, each radar covered 120 degrees, detecting 0.1 square meter targets at 15 kilometers. Classic Soviet doctrine assumed one thing: a physics would cooperate. But the Black Sea had other plans. A temperature inversion was forming, warm air over cold water, bending radar beams upward like light through a prism. This wasn't unusual for the Black Sea in September. The water stays warm while morning air cools rapidly. The density difference creates an atmospheric lens. Radar operators train for this, but the correction formulas assume standard conditions. This morning's inversion was severe, a 10-degree temperature differential in just 50 meters altitude. The radar beams bent upward at a 15 degrees angle. What looked like 50 millimeters on the screen was actually 80 millimeters in reality. Anything below 30 millimeters near was completely invisible. The FP-1 at 3 miles might as well have been a submarine. The lead drone approached at 7:32. The Russians were scanning at 50 meters altitude, but their radar beams were really looking at 80 meters, so the drone slipped underneath unseen. The patrol boat finally spotted it with their eyes at 500 meters. The lead drone's camera showed the patrol boat getting bigger fast. 500 meters, muzzle flash. 400 meters. The PKM's sharp chatter echoed across the water, and tracers skipped over the waves. 3 bullets hit, making clean holes through the wood. 1 clipped the propeller, and the engine started shaking hard, but still kept running. The drone made it past the boat's range with only 90 seconds of fuel left. At 7:33, the spy ship's tall mast came into view about 800 meters away, but the cracked propeller mount was coming apart. The patrol boat radioed a warning drone inbound, bearing 285 damage but still flying. The ship's bridge crew grabbed binoculars, scanning south toward where the boat pointed, but they should have looked northwest. The third FP-1 had been lucky, flying only with its mechanical gyroscope. It stayed on course and came out of the morning haze at 0734, heading straight for the port bow at 180 kilometers per hour and just 10 meters above the sea. The lead drone's engine finally froze at 0734, starting its final glide. It had done its job. Every Russian eye followed it as it dropped into the water, while the real threat moved in unseen. The ship's radar couldn't tilt down below -5 degrees since its makers never thought anything would attack from that low. The patrol boats were out of position. The bridge crew was looking in the wrong direction. But just like the Ukrainians used their eyes to find targets, the Russians did too. A lookout on the ship finally saw the third drone at 300 meters, but it was too late. The drone's camera locked on the bridge roof, where the mast held all 3 special antennas. The 25 kg drone slammed right into the mast base. The blast tore the bridge apart right away. The R381T antennas that could hear radios from Romania melted down. The computers with 6 weeks of data were destroyed. The Mineral M radar became twisted metal. More explosions spread through the power systems. When the fire stopped 18 hours later, the ship's radar and sensors looked like a melted Salvador Dali painting. 6 weeks of intelligence gone. Dozens of recorded launches and tracking patterns that could have stopped Ukraine's drone war all lost. The ship could sail again, but its electronic eyes and ears were gone for good. Within hours, Ukrainian drones launched again from new spots using new flight paths, invisible once more. The Russians could still fire at the launch areas, but now they only hit empty fields. The patterns were gone. Bye for now.